and Varsha Das. Chairperson of this session, is a poet and playwright in Maithili and Bengali, and his publications are on linguistics and culture. He is a chair professor at Amity University, Haryana. Formerly director of CIIL, Mysore, and pro-vice chancellor of Viswabharati, he had set up the National Translation Mission and taught at the universities of Hyderabad, Delhi, South Gujarat, and the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda. With 7 collections of poems, 6 books of essays, 12 plays, he has translated many books and research papers and has also created 545 documentary films on language and literature. He received the Sahitya Akademi Award in 2017 for poetry. His latest book is The Other India View from Below. I request Professor Udayanarayan Singhji to please open the session.
Thank you. Actually, the moment we talk about the translation, you mentioned National Translation Mission. I'm really worried about what he just now said. We are translating culture. For me, translating is not really translating necessarily from an idea which is a Western idea or a foreign idea into an Indian scenario in the Indian context. On the other hand, I would say that almost everything that we do is translation. Because what we think, what we really perform, and what we design are so very different from what we actually write. So even all creative writing would be really translating our mind into something which is bound by the context of it here. I remember before we began, I was asking Professor Anand, I want to, have you written the paper or are you speak? He said, no, this is a performance, so we are all going to be oral and all going to be spontaneous, which is very good. And therefore, it absolves me of all those capabilities of saying something to which I have already committed in writing. So I don't commit to anything, whatever I am saying. My mother is a Bengali, who was a Bengali. He passed away. My father was a Maithili. My father spoke to me only in Bengali. It's very strange. Between themselves, they spoke in Maithili. My mother spoke to me in Bangla. My elder sister, who is a mother tongue speaker of Maithili because she is born out of my father's first wife, who passed away. She spoke to my mother in Bangladeshi variety of Bengali, Dhaka Bangladeshi variety of Bengali. And both of them taught Hindi literature in the University of Kolkata. So therefore, we had in our house poets like Nagarjuna coming and staying, the director coming and spending time. So we have been hearing Hindi. So I've never studied Hindi in schools because my school language or medium of instruction was Bangla. Their school, Kolkata, the oldest school in India. But we learned Hindi from the childhood. that way. It so happens that after the Kolkata stint studying in Delhi, the same department as Kapilji was our senior, I was thrown into Gujarat for 5 years. No way, you had to learn the language in Baroda and Surat to be able to survive. Then of course my course of academic activity took me to Hyderabad and to Mysore and to Shantiniketan, exposing me to various other languages. And in fact, a lot of time I've been wondering, there's something which is originating in Mithila, like Lorica, about which you have Mr. Kishore Verma Manipadma's book, who got the Akademi Award for Nika Banjara in Mithila. He's been writing about the oral epics in Mithila, which are sung and performed for 7 days together by people who do not belong to the upper strata of the society. But I'm wondering, how is it that same thing is available in Rajasthan? How did they reach and what was the method of communication? Because these are all so many centuries away, so many centuries ago, things have started at some point of time. And this is a question which, it was not my question known, because if I look at novels like Satyanath Bhaduji, I find that when he's writing the Bhawan Manas, I don't know, many of you may not have heard the name, many of you may have read it. I don't know how many people are familiar with Bhaduji, because he was the guru of Parashurnath Denu. So, Denu ko guru mante the. So, he wrote a novel called Manas. It's a huge novel, 700 pages. And that's a parody of Manas. But the point is that it's a view from below. So Drodhai is the below there. And interestingly, whatever, if you read some of these things, when I reach South, when I reach Karnataka, when I reach and I hear about the folk stories that are coming from below, I find that there are many stories which are quite overlapping, quite similar, partly different. How is it possible that these stories have traveled like that? Or did they come from south? Did they go from north there? Then I started exploring this, and particularly in Gujarat, I think this encouraged me a lot in Surat. He said, you must explore this kind of relationship, kind of dimension. We found out that 1326, there was a text in Mithila, which is known as Varna Ratnakara, or it is also called Varna Ratnakara. Now, Varna Ratnakara is a sociological text written in literary mode by Jyotirishwara, who is the oldest prose writer. Now, if you remember, 1326 is not a time when Bengali had a prose, or Odia had a prose, or Assamese had a prose. Prose was available only likely in the Parliament languages among them. And in that text, he describes very interestingly a lot of things that were happening around that time. From what was done by many other researchers, particularly from Nepal Raj Library, many of the texts that were discovered dated around the same time, 13th century. So we find that there are plays which were performed during the Malla kings of Nepal, where the plays were written in Maithili, and the singers came from Telangadesha, and the dancers, singers came from Karnataka, and the dancers came from Telangadesha. So, Nepal king hosting a play written in Maithili, performed by Telangadesha and Karnataka, and of course by 3 actors and actresses, these things. So once again, I started wondering, how was that possible? Was there an organization? Was there a kind of massive organization which was doing it? No, it was people, basically. It was an exchange that happened. Then I looked at the journey that Chaitanya Dev had made during the Bhakti movement, at the peak of Bhakti movement in Bengal. And I find that Chaitanya Dev also goes to Karnataka. Chaitanya Dev also goes to Maharashtra. He travels. And I saw that later on, Vivekananda also did the same thing. And I went the same route. What is happening? Why are the people traveling? And then started looking at the traveling phenomenon, and I find that at any point of time, of course, 15% of Indians are traveling. We are the most traveled people within India or outside, wherever. We not only are in 70 different countries, we also within our country we travel a lot. And this tradition of travel is something which has really taken our people, our stories and our myths and our legends and our belief systems to the other places. Food in particular. The amount of variety that we have is also something which is phenomenal. So our music is full of variety. Our literature is full of variety. And our performance is full of variety. A lot of time I've been wondering, people talk about unity in diversity concept. There is another concept against it which was floated by Akademi linguist. He says that I would consider India to be a unity contrast. So look at this, unity in diversity is one kind of theory, but harmony of contrast is completely different. And he gives this example particularly in his book called Kirata Janakriti, where he is describing the Kiranti culture, the northeastern, extreme northeastern culture, and basically lamenting that we know so little about many of these excellent traditions, cultural traditions that are already existing in the Northeast, because they're all oral culture, and not many people have actually have bothered to go there. And yeah, we have Arjuna going there and facing a fighter woman, Chitrangada, and then getting married and coming back. This kind of story is available in our mythical literature, but still explorations have not happened on a large scale. We don't have. And I was then started looking at the novels in Bangla, and I did find that there are lots of novelists who have actually started, who did talk about various kind of tribes and their own belief systems and their own culture and their own tradition. So the oral thing which Professor Kapoor said some time ago, that there should be some method of retaining, preserving and keeping the oral as oral, not as oral as written, is I think very crucial. And the kind of Dastangoi tradition that is available in North India and Urdu is also the tradition which is available in many other Indian languages. Now, right now we know very little about the Covid Lodai, for instance. That there will be an idea floated by somebody who is intelligent in medieval Bengal. And then there will be two sets of poets, or several sets of poets coming there on the stage. And then one poet will be asked to instantly, instantly compose on that idea, taking whichever side, because there will be like debates. And one will compose, the other will then oppose that particular poet. And all the debates will go on happening orally, instantly, and through poetry. So this is again a very interesting tradition which was already available. So there are many such traditions that are available in our languages. One reason why I think that our languages have not done very badly, in spite of the fact that we were threatened by Rupert Murdoch when he entered with Star TV, television you mentioned, so when he entered with Star TV in India, he said that now this is the death of all other Indian channels. So we only Star and Star. But what we have is Star Telugu, Star Marathi, and Star Gujarati, and Star Bengali. And not only that, even when ETV came, so there is Telugu, ZTV came, Z Telugu, Z. So you can't really escape. You can't escape our variety tradition. Harmony that is there in the contrast in all these languages, you can't escape that. Now our tradition in general has been not to agree. And we have been actually taught by people not to be free. Do not accept anything without question. So, whether you call it Indian philosophical tradition or Indian cultural tradition, it's in our blood to oppose. And that, I think, the license to critique, license to question is something which defines our writing. And you find that there are standards which have been set by people, but there are other people who came later in the same language who questioned that. The time came when Kallol Yuga was floated with Premendra Mitra, Buddhadev Basu and several other people who said that Buddhadev Basu in particular said that don't read Tagore, abandon Tagore, completely throw it out. Even if you read him, you'll be so influenced by his style of writing that you'll start writing like him. No, so don't read. We all know that Buddhadev Basu was one of the best Tagore specialists himself, but his dear others don't read. So the interesting thing was that the people who could move away from him, from Tagore tradition, could do something which is very interesting, very different. And in particular, I would like to name somebody like Jibanananda Das and his entire the eternal quest for Bhawan. If you just look at those lines, if you remember, I can read them out from you. There's a whole Akademi volume on that direction. But I don't have to, but I think it's very important to understand how differently the whole thing happens. There's also another thing that you have people who are trying to give you a kind of set parameters. So you have Desh Anandabajan group, which is trying to set the standards of how you should write in Bangla. Right? And then you have about 2,000 little magazines which completely rebel and trash whatever is written and published in the mainstream literature. Those who get the Akademi Award, those who are always on the stage and pedestal, they just throw them away. Because if you go to the districts in particular, in Bengal, in remote parts, both in Bangladesh and Bengal, then you will not find any one of those guys mentioned. Those were very, very, very famous in Kolkata and standard platforms. So they are very different, and you have authors like Shaukat Rokit who are talking about stories where people actually buy trees. What do they do? Because during the Kapash Tula, that is the cotton growing time, you have a whole families which will go and auction and set auction for different villages that your trees are under my things and this much money I'll pay you. So if you look at that story, or if you look at any one of his other 100 stories, these are all talking about such levels of people about whom the city Calcutta or the major towns have no idea. So toward that extent I agree with Mr. Kapoor, saying there are completely different traditions of literature, different traditions of writing. One which is writing in a standard, very lucrative, very alluring kind of manner, like Sunil Da had written, and in the whole group of people following him could write. The other, which is completely different, like Amir Majumdar or like Sahitya, who are absolutely mind-boggling. If you just read them, Shudran Dhabi is a completely different tradition. They don't care about how much of sale their books will have, who will read, who will not read, and where their things will sell. But from a remote corner of a place, of a cultural space in Bengali speaking space, you find very interesting things happening. And since most of our languages, we tried to say that one language, one state during the State Reorganization Commission in 1956. But that our languages have failed us, failed the politicians, because the languages have tumbled out of their domain and entered into Belgaum. If you just look at the way Maharashtra and Gujarat, or even if you look at Baroda, for instance, how much of Baroda is Gujarati and how much of Baroda is Marathi, I still have doubt because I had my dad also Marathi language. Although it was part of Gujarat. So this is very interesting. So actually, the way we have been raised in our own country, no matter what attempt that was made by Macaulay and his followers, no matter what has happened, we have still survived. We have survived because we actually are people who question, who do not agree, who differ, who would like to have a different point of view. I think that is the biggest strength of India. In fact, a lot of people question me. In fact, it's a German girl who wrote to me when I was director of Central to Indian Languages. Sir, I have learned Chinese, I have learned Japanese, I want to learn Indian. Can you help me? I said, what India would you like to learn? Because there's no one India, there's so many Indians. So then I had an interesting correspondence that I had with this girl in Germany. And for her it was very strange. So in 2006, India became the guest of honor in Frankfurt. Then I had come up for being a PT the India Rights, the book called India Rights. All the 22 Indian literature put in one volume and described in them. That is something which is surprising for them. How is it possible to have a country with so many literary languages? I said that this is not the only one because we have our oral literature available in television and radio because 176 languages are used in the radio network, all the radio network. Right? And 104 languages you publish newspapers every day. So, either way, these statistics, if you look at it, the way our languages, literature have actually grown and have survived, it's pretty surprising that how it was possible for us to still remain together. I think we remain together only because we agree to look different, speak differently, live differently, and sing differently, and that's the strength of it. But if you say that there is no influence, mutual influence, that's not true because there is a lot of mutual influence. So it would not be surprising for a Tamil musician to come and do very well in Bombay film industry. It will not be surprising for somebody from Tripura to come and bring in the northeastern tunes and create legendary situations in the Bombay film industry. It won't be surprising for a Punjabi, state Punjabi or Urdu speaker to come and do very well in that industry. And it is not that alone because if you look at Telugu industry, you find many actors and actresses and directors who are coming from outside the Andhra region, outside the Telangana Andhra region. So this is typically Indian scenario. It's not one industry or one area is not an exception. This is a common thing for us, and that actually would define us. I would only stop here because I think we have very important speakers here today. Rabindra ji, Sana ji, and Bushra. All of them, I'm sure, they're much more prepared than me, and they will come up with something very substantial. So I would request to introduce the other speakers.
Our first speaker, Dr. Akshanda Jalenji, is a writer, critic, and literary historian. She has published over 25 books and written over 50 academic papers and essays. Some of her important publications are Invisible City, The Rebel and Her Cause, The Sea Lies Ahead, and Uncivil Woman, The Great War, Indian Writings on the First World War, Brito and Other Stories, The Male Gaze in Urdu, and Kaifiyat, Jallianwala Bagh, Literary Responses in Prose and Poetry. She runs an organization called Hindustani Awaz, devoted to the popularization of Hindi, Urdu literature and culture. Her debut collection of fiction, Release and Other Stories was published by HarperCollins in 2011 and received critical acclaim. She was awarded the Kaifi Azmi Award for her contribution to Urdu and the first Jawad Memorial Prize for Urdu Hindi translation. She writes regularly for major newspapers such as Hindustan Times, Indian Express, The Hindu, as well as magazines such as Outlook, Scroll, The Wire, etc. Dr. Rakshanda Ji.
Wishing unfortunately, I brought a letter paper, and since we are running a bit late, I can wind it up at any point that you want me to. Please indicate to me. And
we have time up to 1:30, so yeah, we can 3 people to speak. So
10 minutes.
10:30.
So at any point, if you think that I have overshot my time, please let me know. So what is Indianness? The simplest answer is that indescribable quality of being Indian. It is that combination of the many living cultures that the Indian people embody and carry within themselves. Their thought processes, their foods, smells, the sights and sounds around them, their everyday lived life that constitutes Indianness lived out in this onion. It is not mythology or religion alone. It is how daily life is perceived by the people. Yes, religion is an important part of this life, as is spirituality, because we are religious people. I would say religion has, it works like spice or salt to food. The diverse sights and sounds, our history and geography, our messiahs and mass leaders, our languages and literary cultures come together to define our Indianness. Over the years, my work has been within the frame of reference of Urdu literature. Hence today, for the purpose of this seminar, I will attempt to describe how Indianness is reflected in Urdu literature. Now, the bulk of my work has been on the Progressive Writers Association, which is very active in the 30s to the 40s. And I have looked at how the PWA, Progressive Writers Association, those who were associated with it, who were fellow travelers with progressive ideology, have built on the idea of nationalism, Wataniyat, how they've amplified it in the years leading up to the partition, and after independence, how they got on with the business of nation building, again through literature, and how socially engaged, socially purposive literature was supposed to, as Benjamin said, hold up the reality, and in that show the different aspects of lived life in India. But also, I like to sometimes, when I talk of socially purposive literature, like to go back in time to 1857 and the burst of political energy that came out of what now is historians call the First War of Independence, the mutiny, the Great Uprising, call it what you will, of 1847, and how, specifically in the context of Urdu, we find a change from the Shama Parwana and the Bulbul and the fasanas that were being written at that point, the Shehra Show, which was a kind of a lament for decline and decay of cities, be it Lucknow or Delhi and so on. That underwent a change, and we see a political consciousness, we see an agency, we see a whole set of new ideas coming in. Many of these ideas have been talked about, and it's a bit like Gagar Misakar Bhana for me to point out most of those today. I'm going to skip most of that, but what I do want to draw your attention to today is a remarkable 2-volume set of poetry edited by a man called Jansar Akhtar, who regrettably, such a fine poet, regrettably is today known only as Javed Akhtar's father. But in his own time, he was a very, very major poet with some very profound things to say, both in his film lyrics and his non-film poetry. Now, he, in the late 60s, edited a collection called Bhawan. It's in 2 volumes, and it sits on my desk all the time. I pluck it and find something of value, of use, of timeliness to use and to quote and to incorporate in my own writings. Today, I only want to draw your attention to the first volume. The second one is more political. It is about the various political milestones over 150 years of India's journey right up to the early 70s. But in the first volume, I just want to flag certain things for you and how I think they weave together with the subject we have, which is Indianness. So in Hindustan Hamara, the sections bear very interesting names. But before that, I want to also draw your attention to its subtitle. It's called Urdu Zaban Ki Qawmi Nazmon Ka Intihab, a selection of nationalistic poetry. Now the sections are called Hindustan Ki Azmat, greatness of India. Every section has about 15-20 poems by major poets, some that we know today, some that have got lost in the mists of time, but were very contemporary, very important poets at that time. And I find it useful for our discussion because of the headings he's given to these sections. Hamare Kudrati Manazir, our natural scenes, and that has poems on the Ganga, on the Himalayas, and so on. Hamare Subhosha, how our days and evenings find reflection in poetry. Hamare Mausam. So there's amazing poetry on summer, on winter, on the first falling of rain during the monsoon. Hamare Tyohar. A range of poetry by, and this needs to be said, not just Muslim poets, because there is this conception entirely erroneous that Urdu is the language of Muslims. So you have a whole range of poetry on a range of festivals. Hamare Shahar aur Ilaqe. Now what is Indianness? I think our cities, our areas, our neighborhoods, our mohallas, our roads, all of this is also Indianness. So if we have this rich treasure trove of poetry, and you have a section called Hamare Shahar aur Ilaqe, it needs to be aware. And as I said, because religion and spirituality are such a part of being Indian, quite rightly so, Janisar Akhtar also has a very long section called Hamare Mazhabi Rehnuma, our religious leaders, our religious guides, actually is a better word than leaders. And so there is evocative poetry on all our religious leaders. So you have Shri Ram, you have Mahavir, Gautam Buddha, Hazrat Krishnji Maharaj, as Hazrat Mohani, this amazing poet, has written reams and reams of poetry of Krishnji and always refers to him as Hazrat Krishnji Maharaj. Then you have Guru Nanak, Ibn Maryam as Jesus Christ is known to, Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah, and a whole range of Sufis and saints. Then there is another section called Hamari Hikaya, which is stories from the Panchatantra, from the folk tales and others, but some that I want to flag for you today are called Janam Kahaniya, Janam Kanhaiya Ji Ka, Har Ki Tarif. Then there's a lovely poem on Shivji Ki Barat. कौन-कौन लोग उस बारात में आए थे और क्या मोह था उसका. Then there's another, these two are by Nazir al-Faraha. Then you have Ramayana ka ek scene. It's a very popular poem, still recited today by Brijnarayan Chakpas. It draws its inspiration from the time-honored Marsiya tradition. So it is structured like a Marsiya and it is recited in much the same sonorous way as a Marsiya would be. And I think, to me, it seems like a perfect example of the kind of military Sanskriti that found flowering in the Awadh region. You also have Sita Haran by Munshi Balwani Rao Shola. You have Krishna and Radha to Mulaqat by Shivji, or another poem called Shivji or Parvati. Ashram se Shakuntala ki Rukhsati. These are by Munawwar Lakhnavi, a very popular poet in his time, sort of overlooked today. And you have beautiful translations from Meghdut and others also in this volume. Now the last section of this Hindustan Hamara is also very instructive. It is called Hamare Andaze Bayan, meaning what should love also not find a place when you talk about Hindustan? How do Indians express love? Yes, there is the nazar which came to us from outside, from Arabic and Persian, but how Indianized it became, and what a vehicle it became to express love in a completely Indian way. With time, the Shama and the Parvana and the Bulbul, which were troops that had come from outside, were abandoned, not entirely, but marginalized, pushed to the margins, and new tropes were born. So I like the way Janisar considers love and an expression of love also central to being Indian. Now, because I'm running out of time, and I will draw your attention very briefly to three things I wanted to talk at length in my paper. One is the whole tradition of Baramasa, which is not peculiar to Urdu alone. It's there in Gujarati, Marathi, it's there in all the dialects that I can think of. It talks about the 12 months of the Indian lunar calendar and how love is expressed. More than love, birah, separation from the beloved, is expressed according to each month of the calendar. Now, there is something uniquely Indian in this, meaning songs for the 12 months of the year. Remember, these songs are both mystic and secular. In the great Indian tradition, be it Qawwali, be it Kabir, be it anybody, the beloved, the words that are used for the beloved are more often than not for God. So you can read it at a purely secular level and read it at romantic poetry, even erotic poetry for that matter. At another level, you can read it as deeply devotional, deeply spiritual poetry. And this is part of a tradition coming from various sources. The singer's mood, singer or reciter's moods change with the seasons and thus allow the poet to join the local, the seasonal and the natural elements, while essentially drawing upon a single theme, which is love, and or rather meeting, milna, and vicharna, or separation. Drawing upon its ancient roots in Prakrit, Sanskrit, Hindi, and regional dialects. So you have variations of it. आप मथुरा की तरफ आते हैं, या आप ईस्ट जाते हैं, या आप की तरफ आते इसके रंग, इसका लहजा, इसकी टोन, इसकी टेनर बदलते हैं. But the pillars, the sutoon, the central concerns, I think remain much the same. Also remember that the Baramasa is almost entirely rural, pastoral poetry. It still survives in the form of Loki or folk songs, or in that another way, one can say that the Baramasa drew upon Loki and the existing oral tradition that you were referring to, but they give it a more seasonal color. I have much to say about this, but essentially you might well ask that why should a woman, and usually it is the woman's voice in the Baramasa, why should a woman's longing for her absent lover hold any special interest, especially for us today? What merit is to be found in these works, all of the same theme, all using the same stock of images, metaphors and conceits, almost all being either variants of the theme, or many written by lesser known, even virtually unknown composers. I think what is important is that it draws on a very wide swathe of Indian traditions. So you have the Neminath and the Rajnati tradition, you have Radha's longing for Krishna, you have Kalidas's Ritu Samhar, all of this, and it's coming into the works of these poets who are sometimes not even very highly educated. As I said, many are rural poets. But it is trickling down through, I don't know, I don't have the right words to describe it, but these are things that are out there in the public consciousness. Maybe there are better read poets than these who have made it available to these, again I use the word with great hesitation, smaller poets, smaller traditions, local traditions, native traditions. And in this company of linguistics, I use these words very, very carefully, and I use them with due caution. But the images that are around, be it from the Ritu Samhar, be it from the Meghdoot, the Kalidas, are trickling down into the works of these local poets. Let me just give you a sample, because I'm skipping a lot of what I have said, just to give you a sense of what they're talking about. वो मेहरू बिन कार्तिक मास आया, पलक पाटी से लग गई सुख खाया. The month of Kartik has come without bringing my beloved. My emaciated body clings to the bed and longing. अभी longing कैसे है? That is for you to decide. Very secular, devotional. Papiha din. These are by different poets. I'm not going into the names at this point. Papiha din namak khao ko pipi. घड़ी से हर घड़ी डूबे मेरा जी. The cuckoo pours salt over my wounds and tells me to drink it, while all the while my heart sings to I had in mind 3 different kinds of writing that I wanted to flag for you. One I just talked about the Baramasa. I now want to talk very briefly about the multiple Ramayans that we have in Urdu. Professor Ali Jawad Zaidi has mentioned that there are over 300 such versions. He's catalogued many of them, and I found his work very useful. I've written a very long paper which is published, should you be interested. It is there. The earliest Urdu translation of the Ramayana by Munshi Jagannath Lal Khushtar was published by the Navakishore Press in 1860. It begins with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and it is today known as the Khushtar Ramayana. It is an Aankhon Dekha Haal, a kind of an eyewitness account of the events of the Ramayana. We have others such as about the Khushtar Ramayana, Amar Kahani by Jogeshwar Nath Betab Bareilly. We have Ulfat Ki Narayan. With time, because there were so many Ramayans, and we are only able to find a catalogue of 300 by Professor Zaidi. Many have just disappeared. They, with time, came to be known by the authors of Ulfat Ki Ramayana, Khushtar Ki Ramayana. Now, again, just to give you a sample, Betab Bareilly's Ramayana describes the Shaktiban as रह रह के दे रहे थे दुहाई हुजूर की हमको गई थी जंग में गर्दन गुरूर की. At every step they were pleading for mercy, but the master, the neck of pride bowed. Now we have a very interesting early named man called Hakim Viceroy Behmi. I can't tell his religion from his name, there's no use of knowing, but maybe that's not even important. So he writes the Ramayana Manzoor. Manzoor means verse, and there are very many verse Ramayans, and they're often called journalistically as Manzoor Ramayana. राम ने सुग्रीव को आगे बैठाकर यूं कहा, भरत से बढ़कर तुम्हें मैं चाहता हूँ भाईजान. Ram made Sugriv sit down in front of him and said, I love you more dearly than Bharat and Bharat. Then there is something called Ufaq Ki Ramayana, which is a Yak Kafiya Ramayana. It follows the same kafiya, the same rhyme scheme. It was published in 1914, and it used the n sound, the asma sound. जब खुमार आलूदा देखी चश्मे महवे आसमां, राम ने भेजी बराए जंग फौज जानिस्तान. So the sound is maintained into hundreds and hundreds of pages. Such is the vocabulary the poet has at his command. Then you have Ram Natak, also written by Ufa. I actually had the wonderful opportunity to direct it as a play with a bunch of students from Ashoka University, and with some of their faculty and some of the students, I directed it like a play, and we performed Ram Natak by Ufa at the Habitat Center some years ago. अजोदा को मातम सरा कर दिया, भरत को कदम से जुदा कर दिया. And Ayodhya was plunged into mourning as Bharat was separated from Ram's. The Ram is unsaid there. Okay, I think I have very little time. Let me now draw your attention to the third. Like the Ramayana, there was a huge tradition of many Gitas written in Hindi. We can go back in time to Abdul Khan, who was quite the patron saint of translation. One of Akbar's He interpreted Akbar's brief to him to have translations of all the sacred texts into Persian, which was then the court language, and then Persian becomes a link, bridge between Sanskrit and the later translations that we find, which are the Urdu translations. But I just want to draw your attention to one doha. We've all read Rahim, Abdul Rahim Khan Khana in our Hindi texts in school. So I want to use that to demonstrate how instances from the Mahabharata and the Gita are there in the public domain and are picked up by Rahim. Look at this. जो पुरुषार्थ के कहूँ संपत्ति मिलत रहीम, पेट लागी बैरत घर तपत रसोई भी. If power alone could bestow wealth, then who would accept fate? Did not mighty Bhim work as a cook in Virat's palace? Again, I'm going to skip a lot of what I have talked about the many versions of the Gita, the publishers, the names. But I will just conclude by one particular version of the Gita by an incredible man, a professor of mathematics in Lahore at the Government College. His name was Khwaja Dir Muhammad. He was a bit of a maverick. he knew many languages, he wrote extensively, and he wrote this beautiful translation of the Gita called Dil Ki Kitab, because his name was Dil. I love the name, Dil Ki Kitab, Dil Ki Kitab. It was published in 1944 from Lahore, and the National Council for the Promotion of Urdu Language has republished it as a BUL in 2004. Now, Shlok 47, those of you who know your Gita would possibly know, Shlok 47 from the second adhyay, he plucks that and uses it as his dedication. तुझे कर्म करना है वो मर्दिगार, नहीं इसके फल पर तुझे इख्तियार, किए जा अमल और न ढूंढ इसका फल. अमल कर ना हो बेअमल. And then he uses a word which we hesitate to use now, Taliban, but he calls them students of truth, Taliban in Haqq. And who are students of truth? Anybody in his leadership who's reading Dil Ki Kitab is a Taliban, a student of truth. And he says to search for the answers to all questions that have bedeviled man since time immemorial. This is chapter 12, verse 2 of the Gita, and I'm only reading the Urdu translation of Dil Muhammad. अज़ल से थी मौजूद हस्ती मेरी, अज़ल से थी मौजूद हस्ती तेरी, ये राजे भी और ये खल्क़त तमाम, the rajas and the खल्क़त, the public, हमेशा से हैं और रहेंगे बना. Then there are many such examples. Arjun's bedili, the listlessness of Arjun, that constitutes a big part of the Gita. Then Muhammad refers to it like this: जिगर की जिगर से लड़ाई है आज, कि लड़ने को भाई से भाई है आज. हुआ अर्जुन के दिल को रंजो मलाल, कहा इस तरह हो के गम से निढाल. महाराज ये है दरपेश आज, कि लड़ने को है खोए से खोया आज. And then Arjun's injunction, मैं इसको संस्कृत में जरा गलत पढ़ूंगी, इसलिए हिचकिचा के पढ़ती हूँ. Sannyasa karma yogasra, I'm sure you know the rest. He translated as कहीं सुन के भगवान ने फिर ये बात है, तर्क और अमल दोनों रहे नजात. फजीलत में लेकिन है बढ़कर अमल, कि तर्क अमल से है बेहतर अमल. So अमल कर, अमल कर, अमल कर. That is a refrain. Now, what are all these, if not expressions of being Indian in Urdu? A language that I see as pan-Indian in its range and concerns. Urdu belongs to neither a state nor a single community, not even a region actually. It is ready to belong to whoever is willing to step forward and claim it. Baat ke uthare, meena uska hai. And I want to end with poor, benighted Iqbal, much hated in present times. And his tarana Hindi. यूनान मिस्र रोमा सब मिट गए जहाँ से, बाकी मगर है अब तक नामो निशान हमारा. कुछ बात है कि हस्ती मिट्टी नहीं हमारी, सदियों रहा है दुश्मन दौरे जहाँ हमारा. This is Indianness.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next speaker is Professor Rana Nayarji, who is a professor, Department of English and Cultural Studies, Punjab University, Chandigarh. His main areas of interest are world drama, theatre, translation studies, literary theory and cultural studies. A practicing translator of repute, he has rendered around 14 modern classics of Punjabi into English. He has one collection of poems, Breathing Spaces, and 3 critical books that are Edward Albee towards a typology of relationships, Intersections, essays on Indian literatures, translations and popular consciousness, and Gurudayal Singh, a reader, to his credit. He has also edited critical discourse in Punjabi along with Alpana Saini and Tania Bansal. This book has been published by Routledge recently. A committed theatre lover, he has directed over 20 major full-length productions and has acted in almost as many. Professor Rana Nayarji.
धन्यवाद कृष्णा जी, धन्यवाद उदित नारायण जी। समय बीत रहा है और लोगों की चिंता बढ़ रही है, तो शायद भोजन के बारे में सोच रहे हैं। सो मैं आपके भोजन और इस डिस्कशन के बीच ज़्यादा समय नहीं लूँगा, क्योंकि वर्षा दास जी ने भी अपनी बात आपके सम्मुख रखनी है। कपिल जी ने सुबह इशारा किया था कि भारतीयता के ऊपर जब बात हो तो शायद भारतीय भाषा में हो। वैसे मैं सारी जिंदगी अंग्रेजी पढ़ाता रहा हूँ, लेकिन कोशिश करूँगा कि मैं हिंदी में अपनी बात आपके सामने रख सकूं। मेरे पास न तो कोई पेपर है, जैसे उदित नारायण जी को बताया मैंने, ना ही मेरे पास फॉर्मुलेशंस हैं जिनको मैं आपके साथ शेयर कर सकता हूँ। मुझे लगता है कि मैं बड़ी टेंटेटिव से आइडियाज लेकर आपके सामने उपस्थित हुआ हूँ। हाँ, जब मैं इस विषय पे चिंतन कर रहा था तो बहुत से सवाल मेरे मन में उठे। शायद वही सवाल मैं आपके सामने रखना चाहूँगा। कुछ चिंताएं भी हैं जिनको मैं आपसे शेयर करना चाहूँगा अगर समय ने इजाजत दी तो। पहला सवाल जो मेरे मन में था वो ये था कि अगर हम भारतीय साहित्य के बारे में आज सोचना शुरू करते हैं तो उसकी बाउंड्रीज हम कैसे ड्रॉ करते हैं। मुझे लगता है कि बहुत हद तक अक्सर होता यह है कि दो तरह के इसमें विकल्प हमें मिलते हैं। एक तो है कि हम बहुत ही संकुचित रूप में इसको देखें। आज जो भाषाएं हमारे सामने हैं, 24 शेड्यूल्ड लैंग्वेजेस, जिनके बारे में हम जानते हैं, और अंग्रेजी को साथ रख के, मैं किसी के वर्चस्व की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ यहाँ कि किसका वर्चस्व होना चाहिए। वैसे भी मैं एंटी अथॉरिटेरियनिज्म, सो किसी तरह की हेजेमनी के खिलाफ हूँ। तो एक तो ये रुख हो सकता है कि आप अंग्रेजी और भारतीय भाषाओं को इंडियन लिटरेचर का पार्ट माने, लेकिन जैसे मैंने कहा ये बहुत ही संकुचित दृष्टि होगी, बहुत ही लिमिटेड विजन होगा। मुझे लगता है इसका फैलाव हमें सुबह कपिल जी ने ऑलरेडी दे दिया है, लेकिन ये जरूरी है कि हम पीछे जाएं। पीछे जाने के लिए जब मैं कह रहा हूं तो हम संस्कृत ट्रेडिशन को देखें, और क्योंकि भाषाओं का जन्म कोई किसी एब्सेंस या वैक्यूम में नहीं हुआ है। भाषाओं का जन्म एक हिस्टोरिकली किसी परिवेश या किसी संदर्भ में हुआ है, इसलिए उनको वहां तक पहुंचना बहुत आवश्यक है। इसके साथ साथ मुझे लगता है जब हम आज समकालीन संदर्भ को देखें तो केवल 24 भाषाओं को न देखें, अंग्रेजी तो है ही जिस भी प्रारूप में हमारे साथ है, उसके साथ साथ मुझे लगता है कहीं हमें ट्राइबल लैंग्वेजेस के बारे में भी सोचना चाहिए। इशारा किया था उदित नारायण जी ने फोक लिटरेचर की ओर। सो गणेश देवी एक बहुत बड़े कार्य में रत है जहां वो ट्राइबल लैंग्वेजेस का लिटरेचर रिकॉर्ड करने में लगे हुए हैं। सो मुझे लगता है कि हमें थोड़ा, एक तरफ संस्कृत है, दूसरी तरफ भाषाओं का साहित्य है, फिर अंग्रेजी है, और साथ में ट्राइबल लैंग्वेजेस और लिटरेचर्स भी हैं। इसके साथ साथ जो डेवलपमेंट्स पीछे हुई हैं हम उनको बिल्कुल भी अनदेखा नहीं कर सकते हैं। जैसे पिछले लगभग 4-5 दहाकों में दलित लिटरेचर उभर कर आया है और एक अलग उसने दिशा दी है भारतीय साहित्य को, और बहुत हद तक मैं कहूँगा कि उसने हमारी जो कल्पनाएं थी, जो आधारभूत बातें थी, जो फाउंडेशनल आइडियाज था, उनको चैलेंज करने में भी मदद की। इसके साथ साथ बहुत सी लेडीज यहाँ बैठी हैं, तो मुझे लगता है कि हमें ये मानना स्वीकार भी करना होगा कि द क्वेश्चन ऑफ वुमन इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट व्हेन वी थिंक ऑफ लिटरेचर। मैं कहना क्या चाह रहा हूँ? मैं कहना चाह रहा हूँ कि आप या तो साहित्य को संकुचित करके केवल भारतीय भाषाओं और अंग्रेजी तक सीमित रख सकते हैं, या उनका एक विस्तृत रूप देख सकते हैं, और उसमें आपको सभी को शामिल करना होगा, संस्कृत से लेकर भाषाओं के साहित्य को, अंग्रेजी को, और फिर यहाँ से जो डायस्पोरा गया, जो लोग बाहर चले गए, वो भी शायद हमसे किसी तरह से जुड़े। सो ये एक मन में सवाल था कि कहाँ बाउंड्रीज को ड्रॉ किया जाए, क्या उनको संकुचित रूप में देखा जाए या उनको विस्तृत रूप में देखा जाए। लेकिन मैं अभी तय नहीं कर पाया हूँ। मुझे लगता है इस तरह के व्यापक प्रस्ताव को के बारे में सोचने के लिए हमें थोड़ी विस्तृत दृष्टि ही लेनी पड़ेगी, हमारे पास विकल्प नहीं है उसका। दूसरी बात आती है इंडियननेस के बारे में या भारतीयता के बारे में। बहुत दृष्टिकोण हमारे सामने आए, लेकिन जो दो दृष्टिकोण हमारे सामने, कपिल जी ने सुबह दिया था हमें, उदित नारायण जी ने हमें दिया अभी। एक तो है यूनिटी इन डाइवर्सिटी, दूसरा है जैसे इन्होंने कहा बहुत सुंदर शब्दों में हार्मनी ऑफ कॉन्ट्रास्ट। तो हम ये दो पैराडाइम्स को लेकर आगे बढ़ सकते हैं, लेकिन मैं इसको थोड़े अलग ढंग से, क्योंकि प्रॉब्लम ये है कि जब हम इंडियननेस को सोचते हैं या उसके बारे में सोचते हैं तो वी स्टार्ट थिंकिंग इन टर्म्स ऑफ एसेंस, और मुझे लगता है एसेंस इज समथिंग व्हिच कैन नेवर बी कैप्चर्ड एज Rabindra Jalil ji put it so well that it's simply indescribable. Essence के बारे में क्या कहेंगे? You can only talk of attributes, but you can't talk of essence. So जब मैं भारतीयता के बारे में चिंतन करता हूँ तो मुझे लगता है उसके दो रूप हैं। रूप तो बहुत है, दो पैराडाइम सामने हैं, लेकिन जो दो रूप हैं वो एक है निराकार, जिस तक शायद मैं और आप नहीं पहुंच सकते। शायद आपको एक दैवीय शक्ति चाहिए उस निराकार तक जाने के लिए। मैं संसारी जीव हूँ, इसलिए मुझे साकार रूप ज्यादा अच्छा लगता है, क्योंकि मैं उसी तरह से संसार में विचर सकता हूँ, निगोशिएट कर सकता हूँ। सो ये मैं डुअलिटी की बात यहाँ क्यों कर रहा हूँ? पहले मैंने इंडियन लिटरेचर में दो तरह के प्रारूप आपके सामने प्रस्तुत किए, अब मैं भारतीयता के बारे में भी दो रूप, एक निराकार और साकार। वैसे मैं अगर कन्विक्शन से कहा जाए तो मैं अद्वैत वेदांत हूँ, आई बिलीव इन वननेस। लेकिन जब हम साहित्य की चर्चा करते हैं, जब हम भाषाओं की चर्चा करते हैं, और जब हम अपने परिवेश में सब चीजों को रख के देखते हैं, तो मुझे लगता है कि हमें डुअलिटी को ज्यादा, डुअलिटी को सामने रखकर सोचना होगा। और ये डुअलिटी जो है, अगर इसको ऐतिहासिक रूप में देखा जाए तो इसने भिन्न भिन्न रूप लिए हैं ऐतिहासिक तौर पर, क्योंकि समय ज्यादा नहीं, मैं इसका उल्लेख नहीं करूंगा। लेकिन कई तरह की डुअलिटी हमारे सामने आती है, जिसको मैं आपके सामने रखने की कोशिश करूंगा। एक जो बड़ा शब्द है जो हमें बहुत तंग करता है और हम उसके बारे में चिंता भी करते हैं, वो है परंपरा, ट्रेडिशन। क्योंकि आमतौर पे ट्रेडिशन को हम कह देते हैं कि जो पुराना हो गया वो ट्रेडिशनल हो गया, जो नया है वो ट्रेडिशनल नहीं है। लेकिन मुझे लगता है, जैसे कपिल जी ने कहा, वेस्ट में एक अंडरस्टैंडिंग होगी ट्रेडिशन के बारे में, लेकिन हमारी परंपरा कोई एक पेड़ नहीं है जिसकी जड़ें बहुत नीचे जा चुकी हैं और उसका फैलाव ऊपर से दिखाई देता है। मुझे लगता है मेरे सामने, क्योंकि मेटाफर्स की बात हो रही है, सिम्बलीज की बात हुई थी सुबह, तो मुझे लगता है कि बहुत बढ़िया मेटाफर है हमारा गैंजेस का। गंगा बहती है, मुझे लगता है परंपरा उसी तरह से बहती रहती है हमारे बीच में, संस्कृति के बीच में, और जैसे वो बहती है तो वो साथ में परिवर्तित भी होती रहती है, क्योंकि एक सार होकर कभी गंगा नहीं बहती है, उसके प्रारूप बदलते रहते हैं। ये सब जानते हैं, जिन्होंने गंगा जी के दर्शन भिन्न भिन्न भागों में किए हैं, वो जानते हैं कि उसका प्रारूप बदलता है, उसका स्वरूप बदलता है, उसकी तेज दौड़ हो जाती है, कभी वो स्लो हो जाती है। सो उसके अलग अलग रूप है। मेरे कहने का तात्पर्य ये है कि ट्रेडिशन को हम कंटिन्यूटी की सेंस में जब देखते हैं तो शायद वो जो डिफरेंस वाली बात है या डिसएग्रीमेंट वाली बात है, उसको हम भूल जाते हैं। तो मुझे लगता है दोनों को अगर हमें बैलेंस करना है तो दोनों को साथ रखकर देखना होगा। कहने का तात्पर्य क्या है? कपिल जी ने सुबह बात की, बहुत अच्छी लगी, क्योंकि ज्ञानी है, मैं तो इतना ज्ञानी नहीं हूँ, मैं तो सिर्फ एक टीचर हूँ, वो ज्ञानी है। तो जब वो बात कहते हैं उसके पीछे बहुत बड़ा ज्ञान छिपा होता है। तो उस बात को देखने के लिए भी आपको एक बहुत सूक्ष्म बुद्धि चाहिए, जो मेरे में शायद नहीं है। लेकिन जब हम भक्ति मूवमेंट की बात करते हैं और वहीं पर हमें लगता है कि एक नया चरम शुरू होता है। अगर ऐतिहासिक रूप में देखें, संस्कृत ट्रेडिशन चल रही थी, वेदांतिक ट्रेडिशन चल रही थी, उसके भी अलग अलग रूप थे, द्वैत था, अद्वैत था। लेकिन आगे जब भक्ति शुरू होती तो कबीर एक तरह से, मुझे लगता है, हो सकता है मैं गलत हूँ, एक तरह से वो उपनिषद उपनिषदिक थॉट को आगे बढ़ा रहे हैं, लेकिन एक तरह से वो चैलेंज भी कर रहे हैं, जिसके बारे में हम सब जानते हैं। मुझे नहीं लगता कि इसके बारे में कोई मतभेद हो सकता है। सो ये कहना कि एक सारिता है, वो नदी बह रही है, एक ही वेग से बह रही है, मुझे लगता है वो शायद ऐतिहासिक तथ्य नहीं होगा। इसी तरह से और भी रप्चर आते हैं हमारी इस परंपरा में, जिसकी बात कपिल जी ने मॉर्निंग में की, उसको मैं अलग ढंग से देखूंगा। वो है कॉलोनियल डिस्ट्रप्शन। जब हम कॉलोनाइज होना शुरू करते हैं, जिसके बाद अंग्रेजी आई, अंग्रेजी साहित्य का प्रभुत्व बना, उसका वर्चस्व बना, और उसके बाद हमने अपनी भाषाओं को भी एक आत्मग्लानि की दृष्टि से देखना शुरू किया। वो बहुत बड़ा प्रकोप था, एक तरह का दुखांत था हमारे। तो उसके बाद धीरे धीरे, the point I'm trying to make is कि throughout अगर आप परंपरा को ध्यान से देखें तो there is continuity and there is disruption। क्योंकि देखिए, परंपरा कुछ ऐसी चीज तो है नहीं, जब नया कुछ बनता है या नया ऐड होता है, बहुत कुछ पुराना वो उसमें समो लेता है, लेकिन उसका प्रारूप, उसका स्वरूप बदल जाता है बहुत हद तक। सो इसलिए ये कहना कि एक कंटिन्यूटी है, वननेस है, मुझे लगता है कि शायद एक यथार्थवादी दृष्टिकोण नहीं होगा। मैं इतनी ही बात कहकर रुकूंगा। सो एक तरह से पहली ड्युअलिटी जिसकी बात मैं करना चाहूंगा वो ये है ट्रेडिशन एंड मॉडर्निटी। आपका कोई भी साहित्य अगर आप देखना चाहते हैं, किसी भी, मुझे लगता है आप कबीर तक पीछे जा सकते हैं या भक्ति पीरियड तक पीछे जा सकते हैं देखने के लिए कहाँ परंपराएं टूट रही हैं और कहाँ वो नए सिरे से संजोई जा रही हैं। उसका परिवेश आपको वहां मिलता है, और वो आपको 20वीं शताब्दी में मिलता है। जब धर्मवीर भारती लिखते हैं अंधायु, तो उनको महाभारत की आवश्यकता पड़ती है, उसी कहानी को वो दोहरा रहे हैं, इज रीटेलिंग द स्टोरी। और ये ट्रेडिशन और मॉडर्निटी का जो द्वंद्व है, मुझे लगता है ये हमारे परिवेश में हमेशा चलता रहेगा, क्योंकि जैसे उदित नारायण जी ने कहा कि हम ट्रेडिशन को चैलेंज करते हैं, हम एग्री नहीं करते। Conformity is not in our character. As a matter of fact, we will not evolve if we were to conform. Then I think we would perish or die out. Because in order to evolve, whichever way, whether you're thinking of it spiritually or intellectually, or whichever way, I think we need to question things, and that's exactly what everyone else was also talking about. So, चाहे आप यू आर अनंत मूर्ति का नॉवल देखते हैं, चाहे आप गुरदयाल सिंह का नॉवल देखते हैं, आपको उसमें एक तरह का ट्रेडिशन और मॉडर्निटी का द्वंद्व मिलता है। टूटना बहुत मुश्किल है, नया बनाना और भी मुश्किल है, लेकिन मॉडर्निटी का प्रारूप जो है, स्वरूप जो है, 20वीं शताब्दी में बदल गया। वो नहीं है जो भक्ति काल में था या जिसकी बात कबीर कर रहे थे, क्योंकि हमारे सामने अब नए सवाल आकर खड़े हो गए। अब देखिए, एक एटीट्यूड ये हो सकता है कि हम वेस्ट को या जो भी उसने हमें दिया है उसको रिजेक्ट कर दें, लेकिन बात यह है कि वो हमारे कल्चरल एक्सपीरियंस का पार्ट बन गया है। जैसे भी चाहे, जैसे भी हम जिस भी दृष्टि से उसको देखें, चाहे उसके गुणों के बारे में चिंता करें या उसके अवगुणों के बारे में चिंता करें, चाहे हम उसको भोग की संस्कृति कहें, लेकिन बात यह है कि आज का आम आदमी भोगी बन चुका है सर। मतलब हम कह सकते हैं थ्योरेटिकल फॉर्मुलेशन कि वो योगी था या वो भक्ति में था, लेकिन भक्ति में रब था, लेकिन मैं जब जिंदगी को देखता हूं तो मुझे भोगी ही ज्यादा नजर आते हैं और भुक्त भोगी भी नजर आते हैं। सो इसलिए मुझे लगता है जब जनरलाइज करें हम तो शायद उससे बचें, क्योंकि कहीं ना कहीं हम यथार्थ से टूटते हैं जब हम चीजों को ओवर सिंप्लीफाई करते हैं। सो उससे मैं खुद बचना चाहूंगा। सो ट्रेडिशन एंड मॉडर्निटी, क्योंकि जिस तरह से 20वीं शताब्दी में हम मॉडर्निटी को देखते हैं तो वो तो वेस्ट की ही देखते हैं। तो हम नेगोशिएट क्या कर रहे हैं, एक बदलती हुई परंपरा जिसमें बदलाव कॉन्स्टेंटली आ रहे हैं, और एक फिक्स्ड नोशन ऑफ मॉडर्निटी विच इज ऑल्सो नॉट फिक्स्ड, which is also changing all the time. Because जब भी हम वेस्ट को essentialize करते हैं तो मुझे लगता है दिक्कतें शुरू हो जाती हैं। सो उससे भी हम बच सकते हैं अगर हम चाहें तो। दूसरी चीज, दूसरी ड्युअलिटी जो मुझे नजर आती है, जो जिसकी तरफ इशारा कपिल जी ने सुबह कर दिया था, वो है between the duality is between the native and the colonial. I'm not using the term master because that would make me a slave. So इसलिए मैं सिर्फ नेटिव का जो द्वंद्व था, किस तरह से हम अपनी नेटिव ट्रेडिशन से टूट गए क्योंकि हम कॉलोनाइज हो गए। हमने भाषा को केवल स्वीकार नहीं किया, जैसे कपिल जी ने इशारा किया था, एक पूरी संस्कृति को अपना लिया, लेकिन अपनाने के साथ साथ हम उसको हमेशा चैलेंज करते रहते हैं। कई बार डिपार्टमेंट में लोग मुझे कहा करते थे, आप तो अंग्रेजी पढ़ाते हो, बड़े खुशहाल हैं। मैंने कहा जी, आप पंजाबी पढ़ाते हैं, आप ज्यादा खुशहाल समझिए अपने आप को, क्योंकि आपके पास आपका अपना विरसा है। मैं तो किसी और की भाषा और किसी और का साहित्य बच्चों को पढ़ा रहा हूँ, तो वो तो एक पाप है, सो मैं कर रहा हूँ जानते हो। सो द पॉइंट आई एम ट्राइंग टू मेक इज के ये जो टर्म्स हैं, ये चाहे इंडियननेस है, ये लिटरेचर है, चाहे ट्रेडिशन है, चाहे तो उसके साथ मॉडर्निटी है, ये कोई फिक्स्ड टर्म्स नहीं है। दे आर फ्लूइड बिकॉज दे आर सब्जेक्ट टू टाइम एंड दे आर सब्जेक्ट टू चेंज एंड दे आर कॉन्स्टेंटली गेटिंग मॉडिफाइड एंड दे आर कॉन्स्टेंटली बीइंग रीइन्वेंटेड इज द पॉइंट आई एम ट्राइंग टू मेक। इसके आगे अगर हम चलें तो एक और तरह का द्वंद्व है जब डायस्पोरल लिटरेचर की बात होती है। कुछ लोग यहाँ से चले गए, सुबह बात हो रही थी कि जब लोग ट्रेवल करते हैं, जब ट्रेवल करते हैं तो अपने साथ वो केवल साहित्य नहीं लेके जाते, संस्कृति भी लेकर जाते हैं, और उसके इम्प्रिंट्स दूसरे कल्चर पे पड़ते हैं और दूसरे कल्चर का इम्प्रेशन आपके दिमाग पे पड़ता है। इसी तरह से ग्रोथ होती है और चीजें आगे बढ़ती हैं। सो एक और नया द्वंद्व खड़ा हो जाता है, वो है बिटवीन द होस्ट कल्चर एंड द अडॉप्टेड कल्चर। सो एक डायस्पोरिक लिटरेचर में आपके सामने वो नया द्वंद्व खड़ा हो जाता है। इसी तरह से जब आप दलित लिटरेचर की बात करते हैं तो वहां ब्राह्मणिकल लिटरेचर के साथ उसके जो द्वंद्व हैं, उसकी जो धारणाएं हैं, कैसे उनमें टकराव होता है, कैसे नई चीजें उभर के आती हैं, उन सब के बारे में हमें चिंता करनी होगी। मैं ज्यादा ये और भी बातें की जा सकती थी, लेकिन छोटे शब्दों में मैं कहना क्या चाह रहा हूँ, मैं कहना सिर्फ इतना चाह रहा हूँ कि इंडियननेस को आप कोडिफाई नहीं कर सकते हैं, आप इसको डिफाइन नहीं कर सकते हैं। आप कुछ तत्वों को लेकर उसको पहुंचने की कोशिश कर सकते हैं, उसके साकार रूप को देख सकते हैं, शायद थ्योराइज भी कर सकते हैं, लेकिन जो एक आइडिया मुझे लगता है जिसके थ्रू हम इस तक पहुंचने की कुछ कोशिश कर सकते हैं, वो है पैलिम्सेस्ट का आइडिया। ये एक ऐसी चीज है जिसके ऊपर बार बार लिखा जा रहा है। ऐसा नहीं है कि जो पहले लिखा गया वो मिट गया, मिटाया जाता, वो आयरन शीट्स, वो शीट्स जिनके ऊपर लिखा जाता था पहले, जब पेपर इन्वेंट नहीं हुआ था, पैलिम्सेस्ट है। सो जो ट्रेसेस हैं ऑफ द ओल्ड are still visible in the new. There is a connectivity, but what is old and what is new is something very hard to define. Ultimately, finally, क्योंकि मैं पंजाब को represent करता हूँ, पंजाबी को represent करता हूँ, उसके हवाले से एक छोटी सी बात कहूँगा कि इंडियननेस मेरे लिए हमारे एक कल्चरल ट्रेडिशन है, वो ये है कि शादी के समय लड़की को बाकी चीज़ों के अलावा एक फुलकारी की शॉल दी जाती है। और वो फुलकारी की शॉल बाजार से खरीद आजकल तो मिल जाती है, बाजार में अलग अलग रंगों में बनाई जाती है मशीन के ऊपर। पर जो प्रथा थी वो ये थी कि अलग अलग औरतें, चाहे नेबरहुड की मिलके या घर की मिलके, अलग अलग रंगों में उस एक शॉल को बुनती थी। तो मुझे लगता है कि इंडियननेस जो है वो फुलकारी की शॉल है, उसमें आप एक ही धागा, बढ़िया बात यह है कि वो सारे धागे सिल्क के, वो ऑर्डिनरी नहीं है। सो ये कहना कि ये भाषा ऊंची है, ये साहित्य ऊंचा है, वो नीचा है, हम तो भाषाओं का भी, मैं अक्सर कहता हूँ भाषाओं का भी हम वो डेमोक्रेसी स्थापित नहीं कर पाए। हम लड़ाई लड़ रहे हैं अभी भी अपनी भाषाओं से, अपने साहित्य से। सो कहीं हमें पहले शायद साहित्य अकेडमी को पहल लेनी होगी इस बारे में कि किस तरह से भाषाओं की एक डेमोक्रेसी को एस्टेब्लिश करें जिसमें सभी को इक्वल ट्रीटमेंट मिले। सो वो रेशम के धागे हैं, एक भी खींचेंगे तो सारी शॉल फट जाएगी। मुझे लगता है इसी तरह की गुंजर इंडियननेस में भी। धन्यवाद।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद प्रोफेसर नारायण जी। और next speaker is Dr. Varsha Das ji, who was born in the family of writers and journalists who actively participated in India's freedom movement under Mahatma Gandhi's leadership. She writes in her mother tongue, Gujarati, and also in Hindi and English. Besides these three languages, she translates from Odia, Bengali, and Marathi. She writes short stories, radio plays, poems, essays, and writes for children as well. She has received several awards. The first one was at the age of 18 from Gujarat government for a book for children. She is the former director of National Book Trust India and National Gandhi Museum. Dr. Varsha Das ji.
यहाँ उपस्थित आप सभी को मेरा प्रणाम। मैं थोड़ा अंग्रेजी में थोड़ा हिंदी में बोलूँगी। So all of us have multiple identities. We have been talking about it. One of us speaks more than one language. In Delhi, I am a Gujarati. In Gujarat, I am a Delhiite. I was born and brought up in Mumbai, got married to an Odia. So the culture of these places and regions is imbibed in me and therefore reflected in my writing, whichever genre it be. I am a woman who writes. That should not mean that I am a feminist. I have my own worldview based on my life experiences and exposures. It may have similarity with some other women writing in some other part of India or the world. There are many writers with multiple identities, and what they write is Indian literature. It is like each writer of a region comes with one piece of jigsaw puzzle. And when they assemble, the picture is complete. That is India. Each piece in itself is also complete. With its own culture, language, festivals, food, clothing, various forms of visual and performing arts, folk literature, and so on. There are social, economic, and geographical diversities also within each piece. For example, in Gujarat, the language, food, dress, festivals, etc. are different in the south, central, and northern Gujarat. Saurashtra and Kutch are different from the rest. Within Gujarat, we find linguistic diversity. There is a proverb in Gujarati, "Baar gaave boli badlai." It means the language or a dialect change after each mile and a half. And yet, we generalize the language spoken in Gujarat as Gujarati. And the literature written in the languages and dialects of Gujarat is Gujarati literature. Like Bharatiyata, it can be called Gujaratiyata. This may be true of other language regions also. And because of this variety and plurality, Indianness of Indian literature is not a homogeneous aggregate of written words. It is like an orchestra in which there are many different instruments. Each instrument has a special and unique contribution in the symphony. The whole composition is recognized as a particular symphony. It has its own notations and harmony, and there are innumerable symphonies. So, National Book Trust India, जहाँ मैंने अलग-अलग पदों पर 30 दशकों तक काम किया था, उसे 1980 के दशक में शिक्षा मंत्रालय ने नवसाक्षरों के लिए पठन सामग्री प्रकाशित करने का एक पायलट प्रोजेक्ट दिया था। कुछ वर्षों तक सरकार द्वारा देश के प्रौढ़ निरक्षरों को शिक्षित करने के लिए प्रौढ़ शिक्षा का कार्यक्रम बड़ी तेजी से चल रहा था। अब दिक्कत ये आई कि इस प्रारंभिक पढ़ाई के बाद उनको देने लायक कोई पठन सामग्री थी ही नहीं। इन प्रौढ़ों को न तो बाल साहित्य दिया जा सकता था और न ही औपचारिक शिक्षा पात्र पढ़े लिखे लोगों की पुस्तकें। तो मुझे एनबीटी ने जापान के एशिया पैसिफिक कल्चरल सेंटर फॉर यूनेस्को के एक ट्रेनिंग वर्कशॉप में भारत के प्रतिनिधि के रूप में भेजा था, और उस वर्कशॉप में मैंने नवसाक्षरों के लिए पुस्तकें कैसे तैयार की जाती है उसकी मेथोडोलॉजी सीखी थी, और वही अनुभव एनबीटी में काम आया। भारत बहुभाषी देश है, इसलिए प्रत्येक भाषा के लिए अलग से काम करने की आवश्यकता थी। सर्वप्रथम हम गुजरात में गए। वहाँ की एक स्वयंसेवी संस्था से जुड़कर गुजरात के कुछ लेखकों और चित्रकारों को साथ लेकर हम गांवों में घूमे। वहाँ के लोगों से संवाद करके यह जानना चाहा कि वे किन विषयों पर छोटी छोटी पुस्तिकाएं पढ़ना चाहेंगे। उन्होंने कहा, गोबर से गैस कैसे बनाते हैं, कृषि के लिए कौन से नए औजार उपलब्ध हैं, शहरों की सैर करनी है, वहाँ के संग्रहालय देखने हैं। अब गुजरात के बाद हम उड़ीसा गए। वहाँ के ग्रामवासियों ने कहा कि भगवान जगन्नाथ के लिए जो भक्ति गीत होते हैं, जिन्हें उड़िया में जड़ान कहते हैं, उन्हें एक छोटी सी पुस्तिका में प्रकाशित कीजिए। उन्हें कोणार्क मंदिर के निर्माण की कहानी भी चाहिए थी और कुछ लोक कथाओं में रुचि थी। ये सारा नवसाक्षर साहित्य भी भारतीय साहित्य है। हालांकि गुजरात और उड़ीसा के पाठकों की रुचि और पठन सामग्री की आवश्यकता में अंतर था। महिला एवं पुरुषों की साक्षरता दर में भी अंतर था, लेकिन भारतीयता के संदर्भ में देखा जाए तो वे भी उस जिग्सो पजल के टुकड़े ही। भारतीय साहित्य का यह भी एक महत्वपूर्ण हिस्सा है। विभिन्न भाषाओं में लिखे गए समग्र भारतीय साहित्य में एकता एवं भारतीयता तब पाई जाती है जब उन भाषाओं के लेखकों, कवियों इत्यादि का लक्ष्य एक हो, ध्येय एक हो, यानी समान ध्येय लक्षी साहित्य। और साहित्य के इतिहास में मुझे ऐसे दो पड़ाव दिखते हैं। एक है भक्ति युग, जिसकी बात सुबह से हम लोग सुन रहे हैं, जब पूरे देश की विभिन्न भाषाओं में हमें भक्ति गीतों का खजाना मिलता है। उस युग के धार्मिक और आध्यात्मिक साहित्य में समानता थी, और वही उस युग के भारतीय साहित्य की भारतीयता। दूसरा पड़ाव है हिंदुस्तान के स्वतंत्रता संग्राम का। अंग्रेजों की गुलामी से मुक्त होने के लिए देश की सभी भाषाओं में बहुत कुछ लिखा गया था। अंग्रेज सरकार ने कई पुस्तकें जब्त कर ली थी। मेरी माताजी ने बच्चों के लिए जवाहरलाल नेहरू के बारे में एक पुस्तक लिखी थी, वो जब्त हो गई। गुजरात की वे पहली महिला लेखिका थी जिसकी पुस्तक जब्त हो गई थी। मेरे पिताजी की एक पुस्तक थी 9 अगस्त, वो भी जब्त हो गई थी। तो देश की विभिन्न भाषाओं की कई पुस्तकें जब्त हुई थी। तो सामान्य ध्येय लक्ष्य साहित्य के रचना में पूरा देश जुड़ जाता है। सभी भाषाओं में हमें कई उम्दा साहित्यकारों की रचनाएं मिलती है। यह तो बात हुई मौलिक साहित्य की। भारतीय साहित्य में भारतीयता को देखने का सबसे कारगर माध्यम है एक भाषा के साहित्य का अन्य भाषा में अनुवाद। मैं जब स्कूल में पढ़ती थी तब हम मराठी लेखक वी.स. खांडेकर के उपन्यास, बांग्ला लेखक शरद बाबू और बंकिम बाबू के उपन्यासों का गुजराती अनुवाद पढ़ते थे। वे अनुवाद इतने बढ़िया थे कि मानो उन्हें मूल गुजराती में ही लिखा गया हो। भाषा जीवित रहे, फूले फले, इसके लिए उनका व्यवहार में होना अत्यंत आवश्यक है। वर्ष 2018 की यूनेस्को की रिपोर्ट के अनुसार भारत की 42 भाषाएं लुप्त होने की कगार पर है। और भाषा जब लुप्त होती है तो उसके साथ उसकी संस्कृति और उसका साहित्य भी लुप्त हो जाता है, फिर वह मौखिक हो या लिखित। महात्मा गांधी ने संस्कृत में लिखी गई भगवद गीता को सर्वप्रथम उसके अंग्रेजी अनुवाद के कारण पढ़ा था। गुरुदेव रविंद्रनाथ ठाकुर की मूल बांग्ला पुस्तक गीतांजलि को वर्ष 1913 में साहित्य का नोबेल पुरस्कार मिला क्योंकि उसका अंग्रेजी अनुवाद उपलब्ध था। इस पुरस्कार को प्राप्त करने वाले वे पहले कवि और पहले बिन यूरोपीय व्यक्ति थे। गीतांजलि श्री को उनकी हिंदी उपन्यास रेत समाधि के लिए बुकर प्राइज मिला क्योंकि उसका अंग्रेजी अनुवाद टूम ऑफ सैंड छप चुका था। ये तीनों अनुदित पुस्तकें केवल भाषांतर ही नहीं है, संस्कृत, बांग्ला और हिंदी भाषाओं से जुड़ी संस्कृति और साहित्य की परिचय भी है। भारतीय साहित्य की भारतीयता हमें कहावतों और मुहावरों में भी प्राप्त होती है। एक भाषा के मुहावरे के अर्थ का मुहावरा दूसरी भाषा में उसके अपने संदर्भों से जुड़ा हुआ मिल जाता है। कहावतों का यदि शब्दशः भाषांतर किया जाए तो कभी कभी बड़ा बेहुदा लगता है। उदाहरण के लिए देखें तो एक राजस्थानी कहावत है, कै कड़ बैठे ऊंट। हिंदी में कहेंगे किस करवट बैठे हूँ। यह कहावत जहाँ रेगिस्तान हो और ऊंट हो वहीं उत्पन्न होती है और वहीं पर आम लोगों द्वारा बोली जाती है। केरल या उड़ीसा में ये नहीं होगा। लेकिन इसका अर्थ है कि अगले क्षण क्या होने वाला है, किस पर क्या गुजरने वाला है, हमें पता ही नहीं। तो अनिश्चितता को व्यक्त करती हुई कहावत भारत की अन्य भाषाओं में भी पाई जाती है और अनुवाद करते वक्त उसे अपनी भाषा की उस अर्थ की कहावत से उसको सब्सिट्यूट करते हैं। भारतीय भाषाओं की एक मजेदार बात यह भी है कि एक ही शब्द अन्य भाषाओं में प्रयोग में लाया जाता है लेकिन उसका अर्थ नितांत भिन्न होता है। जैसे कि हिंदी का शब्द संशोधन यानी कुछ परिवर्तन करना, घटाना, बढ़ाना, बदलना। पुस्तक का संशोधित संस्करण हम अक्सर देखते हैं। गुजराती में संशोधन का अर्थ है रिसर्च, जिसे हिंदी में अनुसंधान कहते हैं। गुजराती में अनुसंधान शब्द है लेकिन उसका अर्थ अलग है, यानी किसी के बारे में, किसी के संदर्भ में। जैसे कि आना अनुसंधान में मारे कहवानुं छे के, मतलब इसके बारे में मुझे यह कहना है। तो शब्द वही है लेकिन अर्थ बिल्कुल बदल गया है। तो इससे पता चलता है कि भारतीय साहित्य की भारतीयता में शब्दों का खेल भी बड़ा मजेदार है। मैं जैसे मेरे परिचय में बताया गया कि 3 भाषाओं में लिखती हूँ और अन्य 3-4 भाषाओं से अनुवाद करती हूँ। तो कई बार एक शब्द को लेकर उलझ भी जाती हूँ। इस शब्द का उस भाषा में क्या अर्थ है और इस भाषा में क्या अर्थ है। फिर मेरे अस्त्र शस्त्र है विभिन्न भाषाओं के शब्दकोश, उन्हें खंगालती हूँ और तब मैं भूलभुलैया से बाहर निकल आती हूँ। भारतीय साहित्य की भारतीयता विचारों में है, कल्पना की उड़ानों में है, छंदों और अलंकारों में है, कहावतों और मुहावरों में है, शब्दावलियों में है, साहित्य प्रकारों में है। ऑक्सफोर्ड प्रोग्रेसिव अंग्रेजी हिंदी कोश में जिक्सो पजल का हिंदी है, चित्र आदि के बेतरतीब कटे हुए टुकड़े जिन्हें जोड़कर पूरी तस्वीर बनानी होती है। तो बेतरतीब यानी असंबद्ध। लेकिन भारतीय साहित्य और संस्कृति को देखा जाए तो वो इतनी असंबद्ध नहीं है। साहित्य कहीं जुड़ता है तो कहीं अपने परिवेश में सीमित रहता है और वह भारतीय ही कहलाता है। तो अंत में मैं अपनी एक कविता पढ़कर अपनी बात समाप्त करती हूँ, जिसका टाइटल है आगोश। कन्याकुमारी के किनारे पैर भिगोए हिंद महासागर में, और तरंगें फैली और घुल मिल गई बंगाल की खाड़ी और अरब सागर की लहरों में। मौजों के छिड़काव से मैं भीग गई अंतर्मन की गहराइयों में। ऊपर आकाश में उड़ते सफेद नीले बादल, उत्तर में हिमालय के शिखरों को छूकर दाएं बाएं बंटकर गर्भ में जल को भरकर रिमझिम बरस पड़े थार की भूमि पर, चिलिका सरोवर पर सराबोर धरती स्नेह जल से। मन करता है गले लगा लो नदी पर्वत खेत मैदानों को, विभिन्न रंग रूपों से सजी प्रजा को, बंदगी और बोलियों की अनेकता को, अनोखी धरती की समृद्ध सुंदरता को। लेकिन मेरे 2 हाथों के आगोश में ये सारा कैसे समाएगा। दिल का दरवाजा जो खोल दूं तो पूरा देश भीतर आ जाएगा। व्यक्ति में समष्टि इसी को कहते हैं ना।
I must thank all the 3 speakers for excellent, way of helping us understanding the concept of what could be thought about Indianness. Whether we accept the term Indianness, whether we reject the term Indianness, whether we build the term Indianness, whether we think about or rethink about the term Indianness. But it is true that India has always been an enigma for many people to understand. In fact, there are several US presidents who were asked where is India and they pointed to a wrong direction. We know of those stories. But for us, we know where we stand, what we stand for, what our values are, what our moral principles are. And we have our own way of understanding our history. Itihas for us is not just a history. Itihas for us is also literature, which is very important for us, that we like telling stories. And this continuous quest, as you see in Panchatantra, where the listener keeps on asking tatastata, it's very important for us. We keep on asking this for continuity, and we are always in a kind of mode of that. So we come back maybe after lunch for this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you all the speakers and Chair for that simply an outstanding session. It is hardly possible to get back at 2:30, I understand, but at least 2:45 we will get back after lunch for our next equally outstanding session, which will be chaired by Dr. Rakesh Sahitya.